Well, hello, everyone. It's really nice for everyone to be here today for our session today on social media for scientists. So my name is Lori Conlon, not Elena, as it says. My name is Lori Conlon, and I run the postdoc office for the Intramural Research Program through the Office of Intramural Training and Education. And we're really excited that you guys could be here today for the first in a series of workshops to help you really think about social media and publishing and getting the word out about your science. So a few things technical wise, I don't have any control on if you can hear or not. And so if you can't hear, I'm really, really sorry. I wish I had a better answer for that. The best thing that we have seen for that is to refresh your browser. That's what a lot of people have said. And if not, this is recorded and you'll be able to watch it later. So before we get started, if someone who is online can just real quick let me know that they can hear us through the questions, that'd be really helpful for me. Great, I don't have anything. Oh, good, thanks, Brian. Okay, we are good, we are all good. Fantastic, so I'm gonna hand it off to my new friend, Chris. So Chris Gunther is from the National Human Genome Research Institute, the NHGRI, the NIH is full of alphabet soup, and her PhD is from Emory University. And after she finished her PhD and her postdoc, she decided to go down the path of kind of science communication and making sure that people understand how to talk about their science. We're so excited for her to be here today and to really kind of tell us more about social media for scientists. I personally am very excited about this. I don't understand Twitter, so yay, hopefully today I will understand Twitter. So hopefully you guys will understand Twitter by the end of the day too. Chris, if you want to add anything about who you are and how you navigated from PhD land, we can talk about that later. But for now, I'm going to stop sharing my webcam and I'm going to hand it over to you and let you take it away.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you everyone for being here. Ooh, I'm gonna minimize myself a little because that's kind of scary, and also will get in the way of my slides. So hopefully you can see me down here in the bottom. So thank you so much. I am excited to have this be the first of a series of 3 talks that we're going to talk about science communication in different forums. And I have a slide to kind of lead you through that, and I'll show you in a few minutes. But I'm going to start off by saying that it is okay to tweet this. It's totally fine, especially because I'm going to be telling you about Twitter. And also I want to say that this talk obviously represents my opinions. I'm not speaking on behalf of the NIH, particularly because a lot of the questions that I've been asked lately is how to talk to people about coronavirus. So what we're going to do in this talk is I'm going to talk to you about science communication and social media for probably about 25 minutes or so. And then there's kind of a natural break. So if you have questions about generally science communication and social media, that would be a good time to put those in the chat box so that Lori can read them. And then I have about 10 more minutes that are specifically going through a recent article on how to talk to people about coronavirus. So we're not talking about the science of coronavirus, we're going to talk about how to talk to people about difficult topics like that. So then if you want to ask more specific questions afterwards, that would be a good time to do that. So kind of 2 sections of the talk there. So again, representing myself and my scholarship and not the entire NIH or even the NHGRI. So let's talk about science communication as soon as I can get my slides to advance here. Let's see, I might have to click this down here. There we go. So why do we need more effective science communication? You probably have examples from your own field. I have put a few on the bottom here. The first one on the left is, you may or may not know that you're 100 times almost more likely to suffer a lightning strike and a severe reaction to a vaccine. The bottom left is a story that was in The Guardian earlier this year where they did a study and found that about 1/4 of all the tweets about climate crisis were actually produced by bots and not real people. In my field, genetics, you might remember Mr. DNA from Jurassic Park, which is kind of scary. And then on the right here, we have 2 examples of stories that are being told around coronavirus that people are really looking for remedies and treatments, or like Elon Musk, they might have their own opinion about them. So each of these is just an example of where we probably need to have more effective science communication and help people understand what science is, what the process of science is, what it isn't, and the actual science behind a number of these different issues. So most of us, when we're talking to people about science, we use the deficit model of science communication, as it's called, and that has 3 parts. So the first 2 are not as controversial. We often assume that the public, non-scientists, have a deficit of scientific knowledge. That is often the case. I know I don't know a lot about immunology, know a little, for example, or engineering or something like that. So most people do not have scientific knowledge in specific fields that are not their own. And then a lot of us feel like it's our responsibility as scientists to give them that accurate knowledge. So you can see here on the right, there's a picture of a scientist talking at lunch with a teacher and a group of students, imparting scientific knowledge, which is great. So the first two parts, a lot of us agree with, but it's the third part where we often get into trouble, which is we often assume that when we give non-scientists or the public more knowledge, they'll act like we would act, or we think they should act when they make subsequent decisions with that. And that just study after study has shown that's just not the case. So why is that? The deficit model just doesn't reflect reality. It also gives me an excuse to use Calvin and Hobbes, which you got to take every opportunity to do that. So people's heads are not empty. They don't come to you looking for you just to fill up their heads with information. They have a baseline of information, and your information has to fit into that. And then they don't always make the decisions that you would make or that you think they should make or act those ways with the information that you're giving them. So that's something that you need to think about when you're communicating science. How do you want that to go? What goal are you trying to achieve? So I have just joined a unit at NHGRI, which is Social and Behavioral Research branch, and I'm very excited about that because it's a chance to work with colleagues who have done some studies like this. So many social science studies have shown over the years that human brains are actually hardwired to dismiss facts at first that don't fit into their worldview until others or circumstances can help them understand how those facts actually do fit into their worldview or with what they're observing. So just an example of this is on the right here. This is a study from the Pew Research Center in the last 2 weeks. And what they did was ask people, do you believe that the COVID-19, the coronavirus, the current strain, do you believe this strain of the virus came about naturally? That's the red columns on the left side. Was made in a lab? That's the yellow columns in the middle, or they're not sure, which are the gray columns on the right. And you can see if you just look at the top line, which is all US adults, about 43% of US adults think about that coronavirus, this strain came about naturally. About 29% believe that it was made in a lab, either intentionally or accidentally, and about 25% are not sure. So that's a top line there. That's something that if you have feelings about that you need to take into account. That's where people are coming from. But if you break that down, you can see all through the columns there, the feelings about that vary by gender, they vary by ethnicity, they vary by age, by education, by political party, and then leaning within that political party, right? So pretty big swings there from 64% to 21%. So that's important to know. Where people are coming from affects how they're going to receive the scientific information or any information that you're trying to share with them. So this can be manipulated to divide people, and we've seen that. Or what I'd like to do is help you think about how you can use where people are coming from to help you communicate science. So we'll talk about that a little more near the end. And that gets me to talking about this being the first of 3 talks. So this first one, we're going to focus on social media, which if you can see the cursor is this bubble right here. This graphic, spoiler alert, is what I want you to take away from the entire talk, which is you are, if you're watching this, most likely a scientist, you're doing science. You might think about, I'm just going to do my science, I'm going to do my project, I'm going to graduate or what have you. I'm going to start my lab and I'm going to focus on my science. So that's great, but you really need to realize that your science is now just the nucleus of an entire ecosystem that's developed around and is developing around science communication. So we're going to take those in 3 separate parts. Today, we're going to talk about social media and then a little bit more about science communication generally at the end. Next week, we're going to talk about traditional journals, so how do you publish paper in a traditional journal. And then in the 3rd week, on May 1st, we'll talk about preprints and post-publication peer review on the flanks there, and how to think about those. In particular, there's a lot of debate lately about the line between preprints and peer review, so we're going to get into that a little. So today, we're going to focus on social media and then come back to hear more about the others later. So the first thing that I want to tell you is if you are a trainee or faculty or you work at an institution, any institution, the very first tip I would give you is to definitely find out what the social media policy is at your institution, because you want to know that before you step over the line, or you need to know it, so to speak. So I was at Emory University as a faculty member for 5 years and left there in August. And so I've used them as an example. The top 2 white boxes here are part of the faculty policy on social media, which is much more loose and more addresses how you should create social media sites if you're going to use them in your research, as opposed to what you can say on social media. So it's a little more loose. The bottom box here is guidelines is a set of guidelines for the medical students, which is more prescriptive on what you can and can't say on social media. So if you're a trainee or you're an employee of an institution, it's really important to find out what their policies are. So for example, I was a faculty member at Emory where the policies were a little loose, but because of the specific autism center where I worked, I was also employed by Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, which had very restrictive social media policies comparatively. So you need to know that in advance before you start doing any tweeting or Lori or anything you're going to do. So generally speaking, here's some tips for successful science communication. So I'm going to walk you through these, but I want to also say this is basically how to do an experiment. As we read them, I'm basically telling you how to do an experiment, which you already know how to do. So think about that as you're going through things. So the first two tips are to know your desired outcome and the audience that you want to reach to meet it, excuse me. And the second one is know your message, right? So let's say, for example, that I want to do a study where I want to encourage, test different methods of how to encourage people to get mammograms as they get older to help them detect early breast cancer, right? So my outcome would be I want to see in the end whether I was able to get more people to schedule mammograms and have them. My message is that mammograms can help you detect early breast cancer. My audience is probably an older, probably mostly female audience. So let's say that's the experiment I want to do basically. So the third tip is to tailor your communication method, platform, style, etc., to reach your desired goals. That's just like pick the right method for your experiment, right? It's the same thing. And then this fourth one we'll come back to. This is really important. You have to figure out, did your experiment work, right? So a lot of people, unfortunately, sometimes just throw up science communication and put it out there, which is, you know, it can be good, but then they don't look at it and see, did it work or not? Did they meet the goals they wanted to meet? So that's really important to come back to that, just like you would for an experiment. What are the results? Did they meet the goal you wanted to meet, etc.? So let's walk through a few of these. The first one is know your desired outcome and audience. So let's focus on the left here. So if my experiment was that I was trying to encourage more people to understand the importance of getting mammograms, and I probably wanted to reach older women, you can imagine that, or older and women, you can imagine that I would probably want to use Facebook here as opposed to Instagram, because you can see on the left, Facebook, the age demographics are higher for 30 to 49 than they are for, and older than they are for Instagram, for example. And they also attract more women to Facebook, which that's who I'd be wanting to reach theoretically. So know who you want to reach, right? And tailor accordingly. And then the other thing to think about is if you're starting a new account, often when you're, particularly on Twitter, when you're starting a new account, the people that follow you, this was on the right is a figure from an article that was in Science in 2018, and it was an analysis that they did looking at the composition of followers for scientists on Twitter. And you can see the darkest red box here are scientists. So most often scientists follow other scientists and talk to other scientists on Twitter. I have found that amazingly valuable. I've gotten a couple of papers out of talking to people on Twitter. I just proposed one with someone last week, a new research project who was a scientist. We're talking about on Twitter. It's been great. But if your goal from getting on Twitter is to reach the public, you can see that that is the lighter red, so the middle pink color there, and you need to have more and more followers in order to start reaching people who are not already scientific advocates. So that's something to think about in terms of your tactics and how you would go about trying to reach your goals. So I'm going to talk a lot about Twitter because, as an example of social media, because that's what I do, that's how I roll. So I was definitely told over time when I joined Twitter in 2008, I can't believe you're wasting your time on that. Don't you have science to do? That's just dumb, etc. And by 2014, people were saying to me, this is kind of interesting. All the cool kids are doing Twitter. Maybe I should look at it. And by now, you can see that there are actually data that demonstrate its effectiveness for achieving career and funding goals. So here are 3 news articles and columns as an example. On the right here, how to use Twitter to further your research career. This is Marshall Shepard, who's a meteorologist, who's a great science communicator, talking about why scientists use Twitter, and then that article I showed you from Science. So there are actually now, what has become a great field is the science of science communication, which is what my new lab's going to be studying. How can we scientifically study how to be more effective in science communication? So there are data out there to help you do that if that's your goal. And I find this fascinating. For example, this is a paper that, or a study that was done in 1955 that at that point studied mass media, which would have been newspapers and radio, to look and see how information flowed from mass media to the majority of people. And what they found was it does not go there directly. Instead, information often went through what they called opinion leaders at the time, and then to individuals who are in social contact with that opinion leader, right? So this is a well-known, it's called the two-step flow theory. It's a well-known part of communication theory. And then in 2011, a group looked at scientific information on social media and found that they saw the same exact things, that scientific information went through opinion leaders and then went to individuals in social contact with that opinion leader. So we're going to come back to that later, but a phrase that you might hear people say is a nerd of trust. And that's what I want to encourage you to be. You could be some of these people who are putting out good science to people that are in contact with you. So I would love to encourage you all to do that. So if you're interested in doing Twitter, this is a slide from Efra Rivera-Serrano, who is a great science communicator as well on Twitter, has a great Twitter handle. So I encourage you to look him up. He shared a number of tips as well. But this is one of his slides here that talks about kind of the three important parts to setting up a Twitter account. So the first one is to follow people. Even there, I know a number of people who are on Twitter, but they're lurkers. They don't actually want to post for themselves. So you can get tons of information on Twitter. So NIH, for example, posts funding opportunities. They're posting changes to grants and deadlines because of coronavirus. That's all. They're posting that on Twitter, for example. There's tons of hashtags on Twitter, so that can lead you down a number of holes you don't want to go down on Twitter, some of the hashtags, but there are others like the hashtag SciComm. I follow that for science communication. There's one called PhD Chat, so if you're a trainee, you can look at that. In my field, there is the hashtag ASHG trainee for the American Society of Human Genetics. I've seen great information shared on that. And then when you're at conferences, that's really, if we assume we ever go back to conferences in the near future, the conferences are a lot richer, I find, if I'm following along the hashtag at the same time. People are sharing information, and I can also see what's happening in sessions that I can't be in, so that's really helpful. The second step is tweeting. So just like you would do any experiment, before you do a tweet, I would think about what is the purpose? Is this necessary? For example, it's difficult to follow Twitter accounts that are posting 30 or 40 times a day. That's kind of overwhelming the audience. I myself kind of go through changes. There will be times when I post maybe 3 times a day. There's times when I don't post for a week. So I post as I think things are necessary to get out there. You want to also find the right balance between professional and personal accounts. So I keep mine more professional, limited to information. I don't ever, if I ever talk about my personal life or talk about my kid, I don't ever use my kid's name. I called them little kid at first, and now they're kid because they're bigger. So that everybody has to find there are other people who post a lot about their personal life on Twitter and science as well. That's totally fine. It's just for you to find that balance for what you're looking for. And I would also suggest that you save tweets as drafts. If you're not sure, you can totally do that. You can come back later and delete them if you're not sure that you want to post them. I have also gone back and deleted things an hour later, a day later, a few weeks later after I go, yeah, I'm not sure I want that to stay. You should keep in mind that once you actually hit send, your tweet is saved somewhere, so you cannot permanently delete it from the internet, but you could take it off your account so people in the future can't find it. But I would encourage you to avoid that by not tweeting in the first place if you can. And the third point is really important here, which is that communication goes both ways. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in the second part here, but it's important to listen and learn from people. You want to make sure that you're doing both and engaging with people. So this is how I use my Twitter account. So you can see that I set it up where in the yellow circle there on the left, that's my avatar on Twitter. Studies have shown that people trust accounts more when you have an actual picture behind them as opposed to an avatar or an anime or something like that. That just makes sense if you think about it. And part of my goal is to personalize the process of doing science and help people see me as an information source. So that's why I have my picture on there. You can make your own decision. And then I also you get to choose the photo there, and you can see that the photo is actually from this slide talk. And I want that to be right up front so that people know what my expertise is in and what I talk about a lot. So that's why I put that up there. I've had landscapes, I've had other stuff, but that's what I have right now. And then you also have to write your description. So you can see that's my job title. If you work somewhere like NIH, they will tell you very specifically what you can say about your job. And of course, I had to add that the tweets and views are my own, which they are, and they do not reflect my employer. So you can choose that to say what you want, but you may also want to check with your institution to see if there's anything specific that you have to say. So on the right here, starting at the bottom are just 3 tweets in a row that I had back in January, just to tell you about how I use Twitter. So on the bottom right is me retweeting a job ad for my workplace, which was looking for a writer editor, and actually just interviewed a candidate yesterday. So fingers crossed. And then the middle one is a friend of mine, Ed Young, who wrote a piece in the Atlantic back in January. This is the end of January, talking about coronavirus. So it seems interesting to look back on that now. And then the top right is me. I was using Excel and did not know how to use conditional formatting. That's right, I'm admitting that. I had no idea. So I am ashamed to tell you how much time I spent highlighting specific cells until a postdoc just said, you know, you could just use this. Oh, it was amazing. So that's what I'm trying to use humor to show that. So I try to use some personality as well. But again, you can make your own decisions when you're trying to reach out to people. I would also say, though, that I still cannot predict always what will get the most hits. So I'm going to start on the left. That was my, I'm sorry, on the right was my top tweet in February, which was me saying that the NIH is looking for feedback on their strategic plan. We're in the middle of our strategic planning process, our institute. I think that's really important. You can see I only got 16 likes on it, and only about 8,000 people saw it in their timeline. So, you know, yeah. Whereas on the right is my top tweet in March. It is in response to Jen Heemstra, who's a professor at Emory, who does a lot of career advice. If you don't follow her or her columns, you should. She's a chemist. It's great stuff. And she was talking about being mansplained. And so I responded to her with a GIF, which we should all know that's what gets the most likes is videos and animation. And so this is an animation of someone saying it has been 0 days since they were mansplained. You can see I got 962 likes for that, for something that it took me 30 seconds to put on Twitter, right? So a lot of people might relate to that, but that might not be necessarily my goal in getting the scientific process out there. So you just have to learn as you go along and think about what might be the most popular, if popularity is what you're going for. So let's finish here by talking about the end. As I mentioned, you need to come back and think about evaluating. Is your tweeting or your campaign, is it working as you intended, and who engaged with you? So for me, I'll show you 2 different ways. The first one is indirect. So on the right here is a blog that came out in August that I had nothing to do with, which was by a genetics company called Sano. And they came up with a list of who to follow on Twitter for the latest in personal genetics, and I was on that list with some great people, which is awesome. To me, that says that's my brand, so to speak. That's who I want to reach, is personal genetics, right? So that's great that they see that that's what I'm going for. If I wanted to be more direct about it and measure what I was trying to reach, then Twitter has a page called Analytics. So you can look in and see what your top tweet is, what your top mention is, etc., all that kind of stuff. I don't ever use this except when I'm talking to y'all about Twitter. So I specifically, Twitter for me is just more kind of the way that I communicate with people. So I don't often use this, but you could use it if you were, for example, trying to measure the effectiveness of certain messages against each other, or whether or not you reach certain audiences that you want to reach. So that's a way to be more direct about it. So I'm going to finish here this section and take some general questions from you with some successful and not as successful ways of looking at communicating science. So Twitter chats can be a great way to reach a desired audience. So there is a breast cancer social media chat. It's hashtag, excuse me, BCSM. I want to say it's Wednesdays. It's one night a week. I can't remember what night. But you can look that up online. There are plenty of hashtags which are desired specific times when people talk to each other. And this is an example of one that I participated in, which was at the International Meeting for Autism Research, which was in 2014 in this case. And a foundation called the Simons Foundation for Autism Research got a number of us, I think there were 23 or 24 of us in a room, and asked us specific questions with a hashtag. So it happened to be mostly in a room together answering these questions on Twitter, but there were people reading them from all over. There were other people who weren't in the room with us answering these. And this is a way for us to all address the same questions. So that's important because this kind of amplifies and gets our message out to more people. well. So you can see on the right the final report over the hour that we did this Twitter chat, so about an hour. We had 4.365 million impressions. So what are impressions? That means that something that we said in a tweet went across someone's screen that many times. So let's say maybe only 10% of them were actually watching Twitter and 10% of those people actually read that tweet that we said. There were a number of us that said that vaccines don't cause autism. If I even had a percentage of this 4.365 million people, so if I had 43,000 people see us saying that and pay attention, that's a really good science communication day to me. I will take that. So this is a way where you can reach more people. And let me tell you about some ways that are not as great. This is one of the canonical examples of what not to say on Twitter. This is a faculty member who was from the University of New Mexico, but had a visiting appointment at New York University and decided to tweet in the middle of the day, "Dear obese PhD applicants, if you didn't have the willpower to stop eating carbs, you won't have the willpower to do a dissertation." So not only is that offensive, at least to me, that's obviously not true. And so you can see that he tweeted this at 2:30-ish. And by 6:30-ish, you can see on the right, put out 2 more tweets apologizing, which is great. He was apologizing, but sometimes an apology is not quite enough. And he said, obviously, that doesn't reflect the selection policies of any university. And so both his home university and his visiting university were upset by this. I went to him and basically asked him what he was thinking. And his initial response was, "Oh, this was research. I was actually doing a research project," and to seeing how people responded. And so if you are at an institution and you're doing any research, you know that the first question they asked him was, "So let's see your IRB approval for that." And of course, there wasn't any in this case. So this resulted in some pretty serious consequences for Dr. Miller, unfortunately, in terms of his ability to select students or be on selection criteria, and then how his research was monitored in the future. So again, I think we talked about how you can put things in the draft folder. We talked about how you can delete things later. All in this case, so many people had seen his tweet by the time he thought about going back and deleting it. That was too late. So think about things. This is a way to kind of do Twitter wrong, but I have faith in y'all that you won't do that. And let's talk about a way that you can also undermine your science communication. So this is a professor talking about the really amazing and exciting feat of landing an orbiter on a moving comet. That's amazing, right? They're talking about acquiring signal from that. They're orbiting an asteroid. This is amazing, right? But unfortunately, in the press conference about this, he decided to come out wearing the shirt, and you may not be able to see, but it has scantily clad women in lingerie on the shirt at the press conference. So I would argue that's not a good choice for him to come out and talk about this exciting science. And in fact, it spawned a whole hashtag called Shirtgate. So that was not good. And you can see on the right are some, in this case, what happened to be 2 tweeters. There were others, but here are 2 I've picked out that are women saying, "I don't care what scientists wear, but a shirt featuring women in lingerie is inappropriate if you care about women in STEM." And then the bottom one is a science writer saying, "No, women are totally welcome in our community. Just ask this guy." Right, so they had some feelings about this, but I want to use that to say, first of all, unfortunately, this is undermining the communicating the great science. But second of all, it is important to know that science communication, unfortunately, is not equal and it's not fair. So this is an example of where women and men are treated differently online, as are other groups. Some of the ones that we talked about in the Pew Research poll, unfortunately, we see differences between people who are treated online as possibly in other environments as well. And so those 2 women and a few others were abused online. They got all kind of hate tweets, etc. They were threatened, and even one, Boris Johnson, who would later go on to be the Prime Minister of the UK, attacked them in a newspaper column in the UK. And here's a quote from Rose here talking about this in a blog a few years later, where she says, "People made my home address public and told me they were going to come murder me, and even sent me photos of themselves outside my house, threatening me." So I would be remiss in not pointing this out to you. There are sometimes consequences like this. I think you have to think about how you express yourself. I have never had anything like that happen to me, which may just be luck, and it may also be ineffective. I don't really wade in that much to controversial topics. I kind of stay out of that. But you can argue that I'm not expressing my opinion freely. So that's kind of a balance I think that everybody has to find. But that is something that you need to know about if you're going to go into science communication. So that is kind of an obvious stopping point to talk generally about social media and science communication before we talk specifically about how to talk about coronavirus or similar topics. So any questions so far?
Yeah, we have quite a few actually.
Oh, right.
So here's a great one. Is there any evidence or papers, research even, for accurate science communication in the social media changing the minds of those for fake news categories or something like that? So, is there data that if we tweet something good will change somebody's mind?
Yes, and that actually leads us, we're not going to go into it yet, but that leads us into the second part. So the 4 tips that I'm going to give you from this article are based specifically on studies that have shown that that can happen. Absolutely.
Awesome. All right, how about this one? Can you, what's your real name versus the @ sign name when setting up a Twitter account? What do you consider in setting up your account and your names? Like, for example, I think yours was Girl Scientist or something at Girl Scientist. So why would you use that? I think what they're asking is why would you use that over just Lori Conlon or something like that?
Yeah, so the 2 different answers. When I set it up in 2008, there was already a Chris Gunner. You may or may not know this, but there is a Welsh football, as they say there, star named Chris Gunter, and he already had taken that, curses. And so I was actually dating someone at the time who was not a scientist and said, it's so hard to date you because you're going to the lab at all weird hours. It's like I'm dating a superhero who has to disappear. It's like I'm dating a girl scientist. So that's where the name came from, actually, and that was not taken. So that's how I made the decision at the time. I have had some people say that that's not professional or whatever. I don't really care, whatever. I would say at this point, unfortunately, there are so many people and so many accounts that have been done that your first choice might not be available. So at this point, there are a lot of, you may have to have your name plus a combination of numbers. Accounts with a combination of 8 numbers that Twitter often adds are not taken as seriously. So it would be best to come up with something that you could have as a handle that is unique and does not have like the string of 8 numbers in it, whatever that might be.
Cool. All right. If you're interested in setting up a website or a social media account to promote your science, and you really want your audience to be the general public, how do you balance being too sciencey and using layman's terms, or being, the accurate, like, you get it, you know what we're trying to say here.
Yeah. I don't, unfortunately, there is no one answer. And I think your approach changes over time. So there are times where it's a great example is I was asked with other colleagues to live tweet part of the PBS documentary, The Gene, last week. So I knew that my friends at NHGRI, the social media team, were planning to talk more about specific facts that were coming up at a very general level. So I focused my tweets kind of on a did you know and trivia aspects of this. So did you know that the cool molecule that they showed, which is holding a big thing behind it and kind of walking or strutting down a thing, is a microtubule is kinesin, and here's where you can find out more about that, and etc. So that, I think it's just really situation dependent. I think it's also, again, like we talked about, those 4 tips. So for example, I say that part of my goal is to help people understand the process of science and what scientists look like. Like sometimes I'll tweet, yeah, all these experiments failed today, because that's what science looks like, unfortunately, right? There are other people who choose to do that. For example, there was the Instagram hashtag scientists who selfie, and took selfies of themselves, and they also did a great job of showing what science looks like. So there they had the same goal. I'm just not a selfie person, so that's not my tactic, really. So I think, again, you just have to match it to who you want to reach, why you're doing it, and how you want to try and measure if it was effective or not.
Cool. Awesome. So this is one, how do you actually see the impressions from your tweet? Like, where do you get that data?
Oh, you can see it in the analytics. And I think actually it will show you your own on Twitter. I don't know, I'd have to go back in and look. You can definitely get it in the analytics page, which if you have a Twitter account, you should be able to see.
Okay, what happens if you try to maintain good scientific accuracy, but all your followers are posting fake news? Can't that just blow up your reputation?
So we're going to talk a little bit about that in the second part. That's a good question. I mean, I think what I would say there is do not retweet any of your followers if that's the case, and we'll talk about that in a second. Yeah, I mean, I guess people could use that to judge your reputation, but I would hope that they would judge what you're actually tweeting as opposed to that. So that's hard. There is no great answer for that.
No good answer, right?
Yeah.
How about this one? Should you have a separate professional and a personal account?
So I get asked that a lot. I think that's totally up to you. I think it's also about how you want to use things. So for example, on Facebook, for me, Facebook is about seeing pictures of other people's kids and their families and my kids, right? So I use Facebook for that. I have an Instagram account, but that's also for pictures of my family and my friends' family, so that's locked down. So you can't see that unless you ask me. But Twitter for me is my place where I talk about things that are professional more, and I rarely talk about my family. So it's totally up to you. I know people who have separate ones. I know people who occasionally tweet about work and mostly do personal. It's totally up to you. You can have separate ones. For me, that's just too much of a pain in the rear end.
Yeah, right. So now this one's, I could have written this question, but I didn't. Okay, I'm new. I don't understand all this. How many hashtags should I use in a tweet? Like 1, 2, 7? Does it count towards your character
Yes.
limit?
Yes, it does count toward your character limit, so that's something to keep in mind. I mean, I think that is totally up to you and what you want to reach. So, and what the point of the tweet is. So, I am more of a purist, so I will do none to 2 max generally. If I and I'm usually sometimes I'm using them as sarcastic, and other times I'm actually trying to reach specific audiences. So, where you see people. I personally, when I see people putting 30 hashtags in there, A, as you said, they've taken up their whole character count with those, and B, I kind of take that a little less seriously because it looks like advertising if you're doing that. But there may be very specific reasons for doing that. If you are trying to advertise that you have a mammogram truck, which is offering free mammograms for breast cancer, people who are concerned about the risk of breast cancer, you may want to put a whole bunch of hashtags that might attract people who follow those hashtags. So there could be good reasons for it. I would say in general, I focus more on conveying information, so probably put 1 or 2 hashtags max, but it varies with the tweet and the day and the purpose.
Now this is an interesting one, and I'm gonna kind of broaden it from the original poster. So is your Twitter and other media presence part of the institution? Here it was NIH, but the institution that you work for, or is it your own? So as a scientist who works for an institution, and I have a personal blog on science, and I don't really discuss my work at my institution, is that okay? Can I do that?
So you have to check with them. That's exactly why I started with the beginning
Right.
saying you have to check with that institution. It really depends. So if you're at a hospital, for example, they often are privately owned. They have more strict guidelines about that. They might say, yes, you are an employee, and I don't care if you say on there that you work for our hospital or not, everything you do belongs to us, right? So that they might say that. That's something you could duke out in court or whatever if you were really serious about it, but they might say that. Whereas many academic institutions are more like, yeah, that's fine, whatever. If you overstep a certain line, there are going to be consequences, but that line may be further out than other institutions. So I think you just have to check the policies of your institution, but it is better. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have to say for NIH, one of the things we definitely tell all the trainees is have nothing that says NIH anywhere close to it. Say postdoc from Bethesda.
Right.
That's kind of how we do it.
But I've been to a couple of their webinars, and they have some guidance on there. So there's basically 3 levels from NIH. There is the lower level that you're talking about. You say nothing about NIH, etc. I would still encourage you to know what the policies are. There's the middle level, which I'm at, which says this is my account. I do work at NIH because I'm going to talk about some things around my institution, but these are my own views. And the third level is like my boss. We finally got the director of NHGRI, Eric Green, to be on Twitter, which he's doing a great job. But he writes his tweets with the social media team, even though he posts them, but his account is owned by NIH, right? Yeah. So there's 3 different levels. Right. So okay. I think it's best if
you want to go on?
This
sure thing. Yep. We can always, for those of you who didn't get your questions answered, I'll make sure Chris gets them afterwards, and we can always send you an email response.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
All right, I'm going away now.
Okay.
Well, not away.
Right. So let's talk. I'm going to spend about 10 more minutes. I'm keeping an eye on the time to talk about, because I'm getting tons of questions about this. And I did a seminar for trainees at Vanderbilt yesterday in the Human Genetics program, and they specifically asked me to talk about this. So they asked me a number of questions, which were all, how do we talk to people about coronavirus, or really difficult topics, which a couple of you also asked about here. So what I'm going to go through is an article by Liz Neely, who's a wonderful person. She is the executive director of the Story Collider. If you listen to podcasts, you absolutely should listen to the Story Collider because they do a great job. And this article appeared in The Atlantic on March 31st. The link is at the bottom here. Her name is Liz Neely. I would encourage you to look it up. I'm going to walk you through the 4 steps that she tells you to keep in mind, and I'm going to use some examples that I have seen in the past couple weeks around Twitter and social media, etc., to help illustrate some of her points. But I absolutely encourage you to read this. And again, I have to say, These are my opinions, my scholarship. I'm not speaking for NIH about coronavirus. So to make sure we're all on the same page there. So her first step is you need to start where you are. So as I mentioned earlier, you're a nerd of trust for people close to you or people who don't yet know you. So what does that even mean, right? So this is a paper that came out in 2017 by another friend, Craig McLean, and he looked here at how he asked scientists about how they share scientific information, specifically here on Facebook with other people. And it became clear that you are, for example, I know a couple of ocean scientists like Craig. I'm not an ocean scientist, because I know them. When they tell me things about ocean science, like there is no garbage patch, I believe them because I know them really well, right? So you're probably the only biomedical scientist that a lot of your friends who are not trainees with you know. When you tell them something about biomedical science, they're probably going to believe you, right? Because they trust you. And that's one of the first steps in science communication, is establishing that basis of trust with someone. So you can be that nerd of trust for a lot of people. And I know sometimes it doesn't feel like the public trust scientists, but these are data from 2017 that came out in the Pew Research Center survey asking about public trust of information for scientists. And you can see, for example, the first one is the health risks and benefits of MMR vaccines. You can see that 55% of the public said they trusted medical scientists, whereas only 6% of them said they trusted elected officials, just as an example. So that's similar for climate change, for GM foods. So people do trust you more than you might think. So that's important to establish that basis first with people. And here's someone who's really very busy being a nerd of trust right now. This is our friend, obviously, Dr. Fauci, who's with Steph Curry, he's with Jesus and Mero, he's with the guy here on the right in the sports talk, Fox News. He's also in the bottom, apparently a superhero here, which is just amazing. He's everywhere. So he's working with that. He's being, for a lot of these people, he's going to being their nerd of trust right now. So that's an example of how you can also fulfill some of those same functions as talking about science. So the second step she recommends is to pick your battles. And I take this on two fronts. The first one is literally, what are you going to respond to and what are you not going to respond to? And the second one is, if you are engaging with someone, restrict your quote unquote battle, what you're trying to change, to something very specific. So here she's talking about the idea of talking to her dad and saying that she identifies and affirms the shared values and identities they have. So for example, she might hate the politician that her dad once voted for, but she loves her dad and he loves her, obviously, and they can build on that. Right, so that's something to start with, to then start talking about what she might view as misinformation, right? So I'll show you some examples of that. So as I mentioned last week, I was live tweeting the gene PBS, and you can see on the left here, I tweeted that we think the genes are only about 1% of the DNA in our cells. We really want to understand what the 99% did. And this helpful doctor on Twitter responded to me and said the NIH should be spending their taxpayer money understanding how the mitochondrial genome controls that 99%. So I might have feelings about that. I might not agree with him, but that's not a battle that I'm going to spend time engaging in, not least because I'm not on the extramural side. So I don't have any say in where our money goes. So I can't really respond to that. So that's a battle I'm not going to have. But on the right is there have been a couple of big discussions, as I mentioned, talking about preprints. And here is someone who is the CEO of Sigma Xi who was talking about preprints. And so we got into a little bit of a debate. I am part of one of the group who screens papers for bioRxiv, so we'll talk about that 2 weeks from now, my views on preprints. I view them as a good thing, and you can see that he's saying here we should treat preprints as we would treat a dangerous weapon. I completely do not agree with that. So we ended up kind of going back and forth, and I tried to start the discussion by saying, Jamie, I have seen you talk about science communication. I really respect your scholarship in there. I don't agree with you on this. Let's talk about it. And we had some back and forth. And in the end, I actually said, you know what, let's work together on a research project on this. Let's ask the question of, are preprints more dangerous than peer-reviewed papers? And so hopefully we're going to get a research project started in the next few weeks. So that's an example of how you can kind of work with people to maybe come up with a goal, which hopefully might answer some of the questions. So her third step is avoid unforced errors. And you're going to hear this a lot. Repeating misinformation inadvertently reinforces it. So that's why I said in response to the question of what if you have a lot of followers who are doing misinformation, I would not repeat that misinformation because you may be reinforcing it. So I'm going to show you an example of that in a second. But here, Liz is advocating for try saying, for example, I'm worried that you might have been hearing reports about medicine and the coronavirus without saying I'm worried you've been hearing X. Or did you hear X? This is not true, if that's how you feel. Some of the information out there is very wrong. Okay, so starting from that feeling as opposed to reinforcing it. So let me show you an example that I just saw 2 days ago when I was preparing this talk, and let me unpeel the onion here. So in the white box on the bottom left is a headline from the New York Post saying Roger Stone is saying Bill Gates may have created coronavirus to microchip people. Okay, whether that's true or not, this is their headline. And then this individual, Ryan Broderick, is retweeting that and saying, I see the New York Post has decided to just go full InfoWars. So if you're into this scene, you might know what that means. Otherwise, you might have no idea what he means. And then Brendan Nyhan, who is a science communication scholar, is saying, don't amplify misinformation. This is terrible journalism. You're doing a bad job. Okay. So let me walk through this. I think this is one of the hardest parts of talking about misinformation to comply with, and I still have struggled with this one. So let's pick this one apart together. I would say the good thing that Mr. Broderick did, I'm sorry, I actually don't know their gender, so the good thing that Ryan did was to link to the original paper and I'm sorry, to not link to the original paper and bring in more clicks to it. So that's what people tell you a lot. Do not retweet something that has misinformation, because then you get more views for the original tweet and it looks like it's more popular, right? So it looks like instead what Ryan did was to take a screenshot of that and paste it in there, which most people would say is a good way of doing that. However, kind of the bad things were that Ryan didn't explain why the headline is wrong, right? If you know what he means, then you might know, but he doesn't explain scientifically, he or she, I'm sorry, doesn't explain why it's wrong. And then Brendan Nyhan also didn't explain why the claim is wrong, just said don't apply misinformation. And then by tweeting it this way, Mr. Nyhan is actually bringing more attention to it and himself amplifying misinformation, right? So it's hard, right? That one's a hard thing to get into. So you could do what some people do, which is subtweeting, which is where you talk about something without actually naming it. That is usually not effective. But in this case, that's something to think about. And I encourage you to read Liz's column where she talks a little bit more about this. I'm not sure that any of us know exactly the right way to do this, but this is the current thinking to get to the question of scientific studies on this, is that amplifying misinformation reinforces it for people. So you want to avoid doing that. So let's get back to the column. The fourth one is her last tip is to be as honest and transparent as possible. You also want to recognize the limitations of your own expertise. I am not an immunologist. I am not going to talk to you today about coronavirus vaccines, etc. That's not what I do. Yeah. You also need to allow yourself to step away when it becomes too much, because lately there are a lot of tweets that I would like to respond to in anger, but I'm not going to do that because A, that's not a good idea, and B, it's just too much. I would not suggest you be like Ron here on the bottom, who says, I'm just going to stay angry. I find that relaxes me. That's probably not the case for most of us. So you can allow yourself to step away, pet your dog. We really want a dog. We haven't gotten one. Cat, whatever, work in your garden, and then come back later so that you can step back in and respond to misinformation you might see where you actually are an expert, and you can talk about that and cite scientific information, etc. So again, I encourage you to look at her talk and her column for more information about this. So this is the takeaway that I want you all to have. I'm going to wrap up here and talk, just say that we're going to talk about the other parts of this in the next 2 weeks. And I hope you have enjoyed this. And if you are really, really interested in this, I'm starting up a new unit in the social behavioral research branch at the Human Genome Institute. And I have to tell y'all, as Lori said, everything acronyms in the government, and I can't even tell you how much time I put into trying to come up with a name that would acronym to something good for my unit, because it had the N in U. I'm embarrassed to admit how much time I spent. But we have the EMU, the Engagement Methods Unit. And this is what my method unit is going to do. I'm looking for collaborators with projects in science communication, so please feel free to contact me if you're interested. And here is my Twitter handle and then my email. And thanks, I will take any questions.
I'm coming back. Okay,
Yeah.
so I have two that keep reoccurring in the questions. And the first is, I got some anxiety and some imposter fears and all the rest of that, that mental block of tweeting. How can I get past that mental block so that I feel like I can participate in these online conversations?
Yeah, so we all do. I still have imposter fears about Twitter. Oh yeah, that's common, right? I think that actually goes back to the tip that Liz had for us, which is to recognize your expertise and the limits of your expertise, right? There are things where you might not be an expert in that. So you can decide how comfortable you feel tweeting about that. I think in particular, if you're just starting out on Twitter, and even this happens to me sometimes, things that I think are really important, sometimes no one responds to. So particularly if you're just starting out, it's likely that no one's going to respond anyway. I'm sorry, but that's just kind of what it is, is, right? So, so I think it's good to just try out stuff and also follow other people and see how their tweets go and how they word things. There are definitely people that I really admire how they're able to word things. So I think, again, it's just like watching a postdoc, having them teach you how to run gels or something like that, right? Just
Yeah.
do it different ways and you can look at their different styles.
I think that's great. And there's a couple of people asking, how do I even get started? And that's some great tips on how to get started. Another big question I've seen is there a particular time of day when tweeting is more effective than others?
Yes, there have been studies on that. So it's 9 to 11 a.m. Eastern time.
Wow.
So,
Dang, that was
so
impressive.
you can look up the data for yourself actually, and as you might imagine, like many things, this Twitter started out as one thing, and now it's been taken over by a lot of marketers. So, for example, the data that I showed you on Facebook and Instagram actually came from a marketing blog. So, marketers have done tons of information on this, and I think there's been a study as well specifically for scientific information, and it was between 9 and 11 a.m. AST.
Fantastic. Okay, one more question that keeps coming up is this seems like it's going to take a lot of time. I already have a full-time job. Uh, how do I do this, even just keeping up with everybody else's information and do my full-time science as well?
Yeah, so that's a question that I get a lot of people asking, and I mean I can give you the only answer which anyone could give you, which is it's about how to allocate your time. So for me, I've already obviously put quite an investment in Twitter, and so the way that I use it is I don't watch network news normally. That's 30 minutes I just don't spend. We don't have cable, so I don't watch CNN or anything like that. I don't get journal table of contents because I just haven't signed up for them, particularly since I've moved. And instead, that Twitter for me is my main news source. So I would say I probably, unless I'm specifically doing something on Twitter, like preparing for a talk like this, I probably spend anywhere between 30 to 45 minutes on it in a few chunks during the day. So when I'm having my second cup of tea, I'm looking at Twitter, just seeing what's going on. The other thing I would say is I have a Mac and I use a program called TweetDeck, which is nice because it allows you to have different columns of people. So there I have, and you can also do something called lists. So I have a list of people who work on autism that I follow. So that's one column. I have a list of
Mm.
science writers. I have a list of genome scientists. I have a list, a column, which is at the hashtag SciComm. And that way I can focus in on stuff that's specifically happening in the area I want to look at and be up to date there.
Yeah, that's a really good. TweetDeck is also available on just a .com platforms for your browser, so it's nice. We use
Yeah.
TweetDeck a lot in the OITE for the amount of Twitter that we have been using at NIH_OITE. Just thought I'd put that one in there.
Exactly. Plug.
All right. So, what about swearing?
What about
Should
Square?
this, so this person says, some people drop the F-bomb in their tweets. Do you think that actually decreases their message? What do you think about that?
The answer is yes and no, right? I think with some people that would make them more popular, right? So I think again,
Hmm.
that's a question of thinking about your desired outcome and your audience. So if I were trying to, again, going back to the example, encourage many women or people who might be at risk, higher risk of breast cancer to get mammograms, I probably would not necessarily drop that bomb in there. Like if I'm posting on Facebook, just because that's
Right.
not what I'm going for. But there are other people, if you know Mike Eisen, who is a biologist out in California, he drops F-bomb all the time. He ran for Senate, like he does all kind of stuff, and that's just part of his personality, and that's who he is. So I think it's really the image that you want to create.
Yeah, I think we're gonna do one or two more questions here. A lot of people have like, how do I get followers? How do I decide who to follow? And is there a good ratio of follower to followee? I don't know really what that means,
So I
but
think,
like,
oh, I'm sorry.
no, I've had enough.
Yeah, so I think there are a ton of, I showed you a slide that had a couple of articles that were in Nature and Science. I've been interviewed for all three, Nature, Science, and Cell in the past, so I would go back and just look on those. There are tons of articles that tell you how to start out on scientific Twitter, so I would go and look at those in all the major journals.
Perfect.
Um, I would say, again, you have different tactics. If all you want is followers, then you should amplify and have good information. You should say stuff that's really controversial if you want followers. That's one strategy. If you are looking to build a kind of persona, in my case, I'm looking to be a trusted source of information. So instead, I'm focusing on not overwhelming people with tweets and only tweeting out stuff that I think is good information and is a resource. So that's just my tactic. That's what I'm going for. So you really just need to decide what your goal is.
Perfect. I have one last question because I like this one and I want the answer. So are there any really good STEM career or job search focused hashtags to follow?
Oh yeah, so a lot of the trainees, so like ASHG trainee, there's Black and STEM, which is great. I think there's Women in STEM also is a hashtag. There is a PhD chat, which is in there. I think probably I just am a geneticist, so I know about ASHG, but I'm sure there's like
Mhm.
ASCB trainee or others there. So I would look at your professional organization in your field. SFN probably has hashtags as well for trainees. Yeah, absolutely. There are tons of them.
We've been using also science careers. That one seems to be getting a little bit of traction. And academic jobs, I think, is another one. So look to see what the OITE is using as hashtags because we're trying really fast, trying to add those in. Well,
Yeah.
Chris, I really appreciate you. Anything else you want to like tell us before we go?
No, everyone should stay safe and well, and I really appreciate you spending your time with me, and hopefully we'll see you again
Yeah.
next week.
Yeah, right. So can we share your slides too? We're going to do that. Is that okay?
Yep. Yep.
Fantastic. So everybody, you'll get an email from us in about 2 to 3 hours with the slides, the recording, and a whole bunch of resources that I have thought about kind of as we've gone through. So we'll send those out. And so thank you for being with us. We'll send you the links for next week in that email as well. And I hope you guys stay safe, stay happy, and stay home. All right. Bye, everybody.
All right. The
All right.
answered questions I can see here. Yay.
Yay. I'm going to close us out and we
Okay.
can talk, okay? Because it's going to end the webinar.
Okay.
All right.